Welcome to Passionate Reply and welcome to Great Albums. Today, we'll be talking about Gary Numan for the first time in this series and most definitely not the last. TELEKON, Numan's second LP under his own name, is not a particularly obvious place to start tackling his enormous legacy, but I chose it partly for sentimental reasons. While I can no longer remember exactly what my first vinyl record purchase as a teenager was, there's a solid chance it might have been this copy of TELEKON. But that aside, TELEKON holds a pivotal spot in Numan's discography, in that it's basically the last entry in his very brief Imperial phase. Numan's first major hit was, of course, the unforgettable Our Friends Electric, the main single off of his second album with Two-Way Army, 1979's Replicas. Replicas was a bit patchy and stylistically diverse, a snapshot of the artist emerging from punk rock and just starting to meld that with electronics and forge something new. Later in '79, Numan followed it up with something more cohesive, his arguable masterpiece, The Pleasure Principle. This album would pull no punches in its attempts to blast you onto your back with its synthesized screeches. But where to next? While all of Numan's music is distinctively him, he's also never been one to get too comfortable in any particular style. If The Pleasure Principle was Numan leaning into the punk side of Replicas and tracks like When the Machines Rock, then TELEKON represented a return to the dark and ominous atmosphere of tracks like Down in the Park.
I need a Chris Barrow. I bet you're so surprised to see me. Like a special agent romance. Hearts and shivers up your spine. Pilots back then it was squadron. I was flying before daylight. Now I'm warning you are falling. I'll tell you when you're going down.
While The Pleasure Principle had been defined by its buzzing, gritty walls of texture, TELEKON tracks like The Air Crash Bureau emphasize eerie, whining synth lines and create a sense of delicate frailty with traditional instruments like viola and piano. Where The Pleasure Principle strove for a busy and full sound bordering on overwhelming, TELEKON is bleak, hollow, and haunting. But aside from its sound, The Air Crash Bureau doesn't necessarily push new conceptual and thematic ground for Numan, being narrated by the titular entity, a hopelessly mysterious force of death and chaos that seems to threaten us listeners. Equally gothic themes pervade the rest of TELEKON, including its lone single and opening track, This Wreckage.
What if God's dead? We must have done something wrong. This dark facade ends. We're independent from someone. This wreckage I call me would like to frame your voice. This wreckage I call me would like to meet you soon.
1980, Numan also released two other singles, We Are Glass and I Die You Die. These standalone A-sides were clearly intended to be part of the TELEKON era, as their sleeves prominently feature Numan in his iconic black and red leather jumpsuit like the album does. They were initially absent from TELEKON though, at least before some releases added them into the track listing. I like a big hook as much as anybody else, but I can still appreciate the commitment to ambiance and crawling, slow-burning song structures on TELEKON proper. Thanks to the dominance of slower-paced material, the more strident moments feel well-earned, as on Sleep by Windows, the track usually cut for I Die You Die.
Back to surveillance, open eyes and wash out here. A silence is no exit, and no one can save you here. I could talk about my program where everything is white. I could specialize in pages where nothing's ever right, but I don't love you. No, I don't love you. Do you dream? We are just sound, we are just noise. We are all here to lie. And we are just sound, we are just noise. We are all here to lie. Here to.
While it's easy to praise the artistic integrity of Numan's aversion to including those singles, it was certainly a somewhat bold career move. But Numan was more or less on top of the world at this point, and he'd been hitting the top of the pop charts, with both Replicas and The Pleasure Principle becoming #1 albums. If he was a bit cocky, that was understandable, and it ended up paying off for him in the end, at least this time, with TELEKON also achieving that #1 spot. But TELEKON would prove to be Numan's last LP to do so. While there's never one clear reason why an artist falls out of the spotlight, it's hard to listen to TELEKON without coming away with the impression that Numan was a bit tired of his sudden and unexpected fame, which had swallowed him up when he was hardly a legal adult. Remind Me to Smile stands out as a track whose lyrics seem to embody Numan's desire for relief from so much public scrutiny.
We'll take a taxi to the show. We could report by phone. We could remind ourselves that we must laugh. Reconsider fame. I need new reasons. This is detention, it's not fun at all. Remind me to smile, you know. The old friends line, it gets so I feel like I'm in this boss cage. I've got the heart.
Remind Me to Smile's strikingly upbeat melody seems to embody the titular request, putting on a stilted facade of emotion despite the misery expressed in its lyrics. Numan's diffident demeanor and social awkwardness, which he later learned to attribute to autism, undoubtedly made his life difficult. His personality also contributed to his perception by the masses as robotic or alien, almost as much as the futuristic themes of his art, grounded in his lifelong interest in science fiction. The much-beloved track I Dream of Wires is one of his most famous dystopian narratives, spinning the tale of an elderly electrician who's lived to see himself become obsolete in a high-tech world with no more use for his skills. With its chorus ambiguously referencing new waves, it's tempting to interpret it as an expression of Numan's own fears of the world of music continuing without him someday.
I am the final silence. The lost electrician alive. And they called me the sparkle. I was the best, I worked them all. New ways, new ways.
The cover of TELEKON is dominated by this bold black and red color scheme, its crisscross stripes evoking the straps of Numan's aforementioned jumpsuit without actually portraying him wearing it. The artist's disembodied head appears to be floating with a sort of ghostly halo behind it, adding to the album's spooky feel. Equally mysterious is this expression on Numan's face. His head is slightly tilted and his eyes seem to drift away from meeting our gaze as viewers, which might be read as a symptom of his characteristic shyness. While the title TELEKON doesn't particularly mean anything on its own, it seems to be derived from the word telecommunication and could be interpreted as an outgrowth of Numan's established association with things technological. TELEKON is often concerned with ways of communicating with others, as on Remind Me to Smile. Phone calls are prominently mentioned on several TELEKON tracks, as well as the aforementioned single I Die, You Die. Please Push No More, perhaps the album's most desolate moment, is anchored by what seems to be a call from a telephone booth.
Now behind glass, what to you? The telephone line's blind. You have defaced my face. I bet you laughed at me. You bright young things. No, I need no one. Oh, I missed you so. Please push no more. Please push no more. Please push no more. Please push no more.
After TELEKON, Numan made yet another bold move, embarking on a farewell tour and declaring his intent to retire from giving his much-lauded live performances. However, he quickly reneged. His next two albums, 1981's Dance and 1982's I Assassin, saw him vary his sound even more drastically, adopting influences from jazz and funk. They also saw him decline ever further in relevance and commercial viability. To this day, TELEKON is usually considered the last truly great album Numan made for a long time. I'm not a huge fan of his early 80s follow-ups myself, but I do think they're at least a bit unfairly maligned. I challenge the notion that their stylistic shakeups came out of nowhere, and point to TELEKON's increasing emphasis on groovy bass lines as a hint of where Numan would decide to go next. My favorite song from TELEKON is its closer, The Joy Circuit. While TELEKON has a lot of pretty dejected-sounding tracks, The Joy Circuit seems to send us off on a more cheerful note, with a dramatic finish bursting with violin and viola. It's tempting to see it as a sunbeam parting the gloomy gray clouds of the rest of the album. But Numan doesn't let us off the hook that easy. The final line of the song, and hence the entire album, is, "All I find is a reason to die," which is a hell of a way to close the book. With that, I have to end my video. Thanks for watching!
Sending the gods. We're on you faces.